The moment I found the paternity test results hidden in my husband's desk drawer, my entire world shattered. But it wasn't just the betrayal that killed me. It was the realization that I'd wasted 15 years of my life being the perfect wife to a man who had a whole secret family on the other side of town. 2 children. A mistress he'd been supporting for over a decade. And me, the fool who'd given up my career, my dreams, and my identity to support his business trips and late nights at the office. When I confronted him that night, demanding answers, demanding the truth, demanding some shred of the man I thought I'd married, he didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he looked at me with cold contempt and said, "You were never supposed to find out. You had your role, and she had hers. Why couldn't you just be satisfied with what you had?" 3 hours later, I was dead. A tragic accident, the police report would say. A fall down the stairs after an argument with my husband. But I knew the truth in those final moments as I lay at the bottom of our marble staircase, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching my husband calmly walk past me to pour himself a drink. He had pushed me, and he was going to get away with it. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in heaven or hell, or wherever people go when they die. I was 23 years old, sitting in my childhood bedroom, staring at a calendar that showed a date from 15 years ago. The day before I was supposed to marry Michael Harrison. I had been given a second chance. And this time, I was going to make very different choices. My name is Catherine Walsh, and in my previous life, I had been Catherine Harrison for 15 miserable years. I had met Michael when I was 22, fresh out of college with a business degree and dreams of building my own consulting firm. He had been 28, already establishing himself as a rising star in commercial real estate, charming and ambitious with the kind of confidence that made you believe anything was possible. He had pursued me relentlessly, sending flowers to my office, taking me to expensive restaurants, painting a picture of a future where we'd build an empire together. He'd promised that my business acumen and his industry connections would make us unstoppable. He'd made me feel valued, appreciated, essential to his success. What I hadn't known was that he'd been dating someone else the entire time we were together, a woman named Jennifer Morrison who worked as a receptionist at one of his properties. While he was promising me a partnership in business and life, he was telling Jennifer that I was just a convenient arrangement, someone whose family connections and education would help his career. He'd married me for my trust fund and my family's business network. He'd kept Jennifer as his real love, the mother of his children, the woman he actually wanted to build a life with. And I'd been too blinded by love and ambition to see any of it. In my previous life, I'd married Michael in a lavish ceremony paid for by my parents. I'd postponed my business plans to support his career, using my connections to introduce him to influential people, helping him close deals, managing his properties while he traveled for business. I'd been the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, managing his image, sacrificing my own ambitions to elevate his. All while he maintained a second household across town, raising 2 children I didn't know existed until the day I found those paternity test results. But this time I had knowledge. I had clarity. And I had the advantage of knowing exactly how the story would end if I made the same choices again. I stared at the wedding dress hanging in my closet, the one I'd been supposed to wear tomorrow. In my previous life, I'd thought it was the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen. A symbol of new beginnings and eternal love. Now it looked like a costume for a role I refused to play. I grabbed my phone and called Michael. "Catherine." His voice was warm, loving, everything I'd once found irresistible. "I can't believe this time tomorrow you'll be my wife. I'm the luckiest man alive." In my previous life, those words had made my heart flutter. Now they made my stomach turn. "Michael, we need to talk," I said. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" "I need you to be honest with me about something," I said carefully. "Are you seeing anyone else?" There was a pause, just long enough for me to know he was calculating his response. "What? Catherine, what kind of question is that? We're getting married tomorrow. You're the only woman I want." "That's not what I asked," I pressed. "I asked if you're seeing anyone else. Right now. At this moment." "This is pre-wedding jitters talking," Michael said smoothly. "Sweetheart, I understand you're nervous, but you have nothing to worry about. I love you. Only you. Every word was a lie, delivered with the kind of polished sincerity he'd perfected over years of deception. Where are you right now? I asked. At my apartment, going over some last-minute details for tomorrow. Alone. Of course alone. Catherine, what's this really about? I knew exactly where he was. In my previous timeline, I'd later discovered he'd spent the night before our wedding with Jennifer, consoling her about having to watch him marry someone else, promising her that the marriage was just for appearances and business purposes. I'm calling off the wedding, I said. The silence on the other end was absolute. You're what? Michael finally said, his smooth tone cracking slightly. I'm calling off the wedding. I can't marry you. Catherine, if this is about cold feet, we can talk about it. Let me come over. Don't, I interrupted. This isn't cold feet. This is clarity. I don't want to marry you, Michael. I don't think we're right for each other. You don't think? I could hear him struggling to maintain his composure. Catherine, we have 200 guests arriving tomorrow. Your parents have spent a fortune on this wedding. You can't just. I can and I am, I said firmly. The wedding is off. I'll handle informing the guests and vendors. You can keep the ring. Catherine, please, Michael said, and now there was genuine panic in his voice. Let's not make any rash decisions. Let me come over and we can talk this through. There's nothing to talk through. Goodbye, Michael. I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking, but not from doubt. From relief. From the exhilarating terror of jumping off a cliff you know will kill you. Except this time you're jumping away from the danger instead of toward it. My bedroom door burst open and my mother rushed in, her face a mask of concern. Catherine, what's going on? Michael just called the house phone in a complete panic, saying you've called off the wedding. I have, I said calmly. You've what? Catherine, what are you talking about? The wedding is tomorrow. I know. And it's not happening. My mother sat down heavily on my bed. Sweetheart, I understand having second thoughts is normal, but you can't just cancel a wedding the night before. Mom, I interrupted. I don't love Michael. I don't want to marry him. And I'm not going to. You don't love Catherine. You've been planning this wedding for months. You've been so excited. I've been going through the motions, I said. But I'm done pretending. I'm not marrying Michael Harrison. My mother studied my face for a long moment. Is there something about Michael you're not telling me? Has he done something? I thought about revealing what I knew, about Jennifer, about the children, about the decade of deception that would follow if I went through with this marriage. But I had no proof, only knowledge from a timeline that hadn't happened yet. I just know we're not right for each other, I said instead. And I'd rather disappoint 200 guests now than spend the rest of my life in the wrong marriage. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, surprisingly, she reached over and took my hand. Your father is going to be upset about the money, she said. And the embarrassment. But Catherine, if you're sure about this, I support your decision. A marriage is for life. One day of embarrassment is better than decades of regret. I felt tears prick my eyes. In my previous life, my mother had died 5 years into my marriage, never knowing about Michael's betrayal. This time, I was giving us both a different story. I'm sure, I said. I've never been more sure of anything. The next 24 hours were chaos. Canceling a wedding with 200 guests, returning gifts, dealing with vendors, fielding calls from confused relatives. It was exhausting and embarrassing and one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Michael tried everything. He showed up at my parents' house with flowers and apologies. He sent emails promising to be better, to prove his love, to do whatever it took to win me back. He had his mother call my mother, his friends call my friends, mounting a full-court press to change my mind. But I held firm. And with each passing day, I felt lighter. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, I was having coffee with my best friend Sarah, when she casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Did you hear about Michael? She asked. What about him? I tried to keep my voice neutral. Apparently he's been seeing someone. Some girl who works at one of his properties. People are saying they've been together for a while, maybe even before you two broke up. Jennifer. Even in this timeline, she existed. Even without marrying me, Michael had been maintaining his double life. Good for him, I said, meaning it. Let Jennifer have him. She deserved the headache. Aren't you upset? Sarah asked, studying my face. Why would I be upset? I'm the one who called off the wedding. Yeah, but finding out he was cheating. I'm relieved, I said honestly. It confirms I made the right choice. And I was relieved. In my previous life, I'd spent 15 years wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't enough, how I could have failed so completely to hold my husband's attention. Now I knew the truth. It had never been about me. Michael was simply a man who wanted everything. The respectable wife with connections and money, and the mistress who made him feel alive. This time he could have neither. Over the next few months, I threw myself into building the consulting firm I'd always dreamed of. Without a husband to support or appearances to maintain, I had time and energy to focus on my own ambitions. I started small, taking on freelance projects while building my client base. I used the connections I'd made in college, reaching out to former professors and classmates, offering my services at competitive rates to build my portfolio. Within 6 months, I had enough regular clients to rent a small office. Within a year, I had hired my first employee. Within 2 years, I had a team of 5 and was competing for contracts with firms 3 times my size. I was building something that was mine. Something that couldn't be taken away by a man's betrayal or a marriage's end. And I was happy. Genuinely, authentically happy in a way I'd never been in my previous life. I dated occasionally, but casually and without the desperate need to find the one that had characterized my early 20s the first time around. I'd learned the hard way that romantic love wasn't the only path to fulfillment, and sometimes it wasn't even the most important one. I was 31 years old, successful and independent, when I ran into Michael Harrison for the first time since our canceled wedding. I was having lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, celebrating landing a major new client, when I saw him across the room. He was older, grayer, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 8 years ago. He was also alone, nursing a drink at the bar with the kind of defeated posture I recognized from the last few years of our marriage in my previous timeline. Our eyes met across the restaurant, and I saw the moment he recognized me. Shock, confusion, and something that looked like regret flashed across his face. He approached my table hesitantly. "Catherine," he said. "Wow. It's been a long time." 8 years, I agreed pleasantly. "You look amazing. Really successful." He gestured at my designer suit, the expensive watch I'd bought myself after my first major contract. "Thank you. I've been fortunate." "I heard about your firm," Michael continued. "Walsh Consulting, right? You're doing really well." "We are," I confirmed. "How about you? Still in real estate?" Something dark crossed his face. "Not as much anymore. The market took a hit a few years back and I had some personal issues that complicated things." I knew exactly what personal issues he meant. In my previous timeline, Jennifer had discovered his marriage to me around year 10 and demanded he choose. He tried to maintain both relationships, ended up losing Jennifer's trust while also destroying our marriage. Their children had grown up confused about why their father couldn't acknowledge them publicly. It had been a mess that had hurt everyone involved. This time, without me as his respectable wife cover, Jennifer had apparently figured out much sooner that Michael wasn't the committed partner he'd promised to be. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not sorry at all. "Yeah, well." Michael cleared his throat. "Look, I know this is probably weird, but I've thought about you a lot over the years. Wondered what might have been different if I'd married you." I finished for him. "Yeah." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who'd spent his life making selfish choices, and was finally facing the consequences. In my previous timeline, those consequences had included my death. This time they just included his loneliness. "I can tell you exactly what would have been different," I said. "I would have spent 15 years supporting your career, while you maintained a secret family across town. I would have sacrificed my dreams and ambitions to play the role of perfect wife, while you lived a double life. And eventually, when I discovered the truth, you would have found a way to remove me from the picture rather than face accountability." Michael's face went white. How did you know about Jennifer and the children? I smiled coldly. Let's just say I'm very good at research. It's what made my consulting firm so successful. That wasn't exactly true, but it was close enough. Catherine, save it. I interrupted. I don't need your explanations or apologies. I'm just grateful I figured out who you really were before I made the mistake of marrying you. I stood up, gathering my things. I have to get back to my office. Enjoy your lunch, Michael. And for what it's worth, I hope you eventually figure out how to be honest with the people in your life. It would save everyone a lot of pain. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. In my previous life, Michael had had all the power, the knowledge, the deception, the control. This time, I had walked away with my dignity, my dreams, and my life intact. That evening, I sat in my office after everyone else had gone home, looking at the success I'd built. My company occupied an entire floor now, with 15 employees and contracts with some of the most prestigious companies in the city. But more than the professional success, I had built a life that was authentically mine. I had friends who valued me for who I was, not who I was married to. I had interests and hobbies that brought me joy. I had the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted, not what someone else needed from me. My phone rang. It was my mother. Hi, Mom, I answered. Hi, sweetheart. I was just calling to see if you're still coming to dinner on Sunday. Your father wants to talk to you about possibly investing in an expansion for your firm. In my previous life, my father had refused to invest in Michael's schemes, seeing through his charm to the calculating opportunists beneath. But he'd never had the chance to invest in my dreams, because I'd given them up to support my husband. I'll be there, I said. And Mom, thank you. For what, dear? For supporting my decision 8 years ago, to call off the wedding. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Catherine, you've thanked me for that at least a dozen times over the years. I think you can stop now. I know, I said. But I'm just really grateful. That decision changed my entire life. Well, I'm grateful you had the courage to make it, my mother said softly. I see how happy you are now, how successful and fulfilled. That's all I ever wanted for you. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet office, thinking about the two paths my life had taken. In one timeline, I'd been Catherine Harrison, trophy wife to a cheating husband, slowly losing myself until there was nothing left to lose. In this timeline, I was Catherine Walsh, successful business owner and woman who had learned to value herself enough to walk away from a gilded cage. The difference was a single choice, made on a single night, to refuse to settle for a life that would slowly kill me. 3 years later, I was 34 and attending a charity gala when I quite literally ran into someone who would change my life again, but this time in a much better way. His name was David Chin, and he was a professor of economics at the university. We collided near the refreshment table, resulting in me wearing most of his champagne. I am so sorry, he said immediately, producing a handkerchief and attempting to help. I wasn't watching where I was going. It's fine, I said, laughing despite the champagne-soaked dress. I wasn't either. Still, let me at least pay for the dry cleaning, he insisted. Or replace the dress entirely. Whatever you need. I looked at him properly for the first time, mid-30s, wearing glasses that kept sliding down his nose, with the kind of genuine concern in his eyes that suggested this mishap was genuinely distressing him. How about you buy me a drink instead? I suggested. Preferably one I can actually drink rather than wear. He smiled, relieved. I think I can manage that. We ended up talking for the rest of the evening. David was funny, intelligent, passionate about his work teaching economics to undergraduates who mostly just wanted to know how to get rich quick. He asked thoughtful questions about my consulting firm, and actually listened to the answers instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. Most importantly, he didn't try to impress me with his connections or his potential or his vision for our future together. He was just himself, a slightly awkward academic with a dry sense of humor and genuine interest in the world around him. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant that David swore made the best carbonara in the city. He was right, it was incredible. So, David said over dinner, I have to confess something. My stomach clenched. Here it comes, I thought. The revelation that he's married, or has a secret family, or is somehow not who he appears to be. What is it? I asked carefully. I Googled you after we met, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. I wanted to make sure you weren't some kind of champagne dress destroying scam artist. I laughed, relieved. And what did you find? That you're incredibly successful, well respected in your industry, and that you called off your wedding 8 years ago, literally the night before it was supposed to happen, which sparked some wild speculation about what could have possibly happened. I tensed slightly. And what did you think when you read that? I thought that you must have had a really good reason, David said simply, and that it probably took a lot of courage to make that choice, especially with 200 guests arriving the next day. It did, I said quietly. Do you want to talk about it? I studied David's face, looking for signs of judgment or salacious curiosity, but all I saw was genuine interest and kindness. I realized the night before that I was about to marry someone I didn't really know, I said carefully. Someone who I'd built up in my head into this perfect partner, when the reality was much more complicated. So I chose myself instead. David nodded thoughtfully. That's incredibly healthy. Most people would have gone through with it out of obligation or fear of embarrassment. I was embarrassed, I admitted. It was humiliating, actually. But it was better than spending the rest of my life in the wrong marriage. Well, I'm glad you made that choice, David said. Not just because it means you're available now, but because it means you're someone who values yourself enough to make hard decisions. That was the moment I started to fall for David Chun. Not because he was charming or impressive or had a vision for our future together, but because he saw my strength instead of my failure, my courage instead of my embarrassment. We dated for 2 years before getting engaged, and even then, I was nervous. I'd been engaged before, after all, and look how that had turned out. But David was patient with my fears and insecurities. When I had nightmares about weddings that turned into disasters, he held me and reminded me that this was different. When I panicked about losing myself in a marriage, he pointed out all the ways he supported my independence rather than threatened it. Catherine, he said one night as we were planning our wedding, I'm not asking you to give up anything to be with me. I'm asking you to build a life with me that makes both of us better, not smaller. We got married in a small ceremony with 50 close friends and family members. My mother cried happy tears. My father walked me down the aisle with obvious pride. And when David and I exchanged vows that we'd written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams and maintain our individual identities while building something together, I felt a peace I'd never experienced in my previous marriage. This was what partnership was supposed to feel like. Not subsumption or sacrifice, but genuine collaboration between equals. 5 years into our marriage, my consulting firm had grown to become one of the most respected in the city. David had published his second book, and was being courted by prestigious universities around the country. We had bought a house together, traveled the world together, built a life that reflected both our values and ambitions. We had also started discussing having children, something I'd never thought I'd want after the trauma of my previous life. I'm scared, I admitted to David one night. What if having kids changes everything? What if I lose myself again? Do you trust me? David asked. Yes. Then trust that I'm not going to let you disappear into motherhood the way women so often do, he said. We're partners. That means we share responsibilities equally. It means your career and identity matter just as much as mine. It means we figure out how to be parents without either of us sacrificing who we are. 2 years later, we had twin girls, Aurora and Diana, named after my grandmother and David's mother. They were perfect, demanding, exhausting, and the greatest joy I'd ever experienced. David kept his promise. We split childcare duties equally, hired help when we needed it, and made sure both our careers could continue flourishing. It wasn't always easy, but it was fair. More importantly, it was honest. There were no secret families, no hidden betrayals, no double lives. Just two people working together to build something real. When our daughters were 3 years old, I received a letter that I almost didn't open. It was from Jennifer Morrison, Michael's longtime mistress. In my previous life, I'd never known Jennifer existed until I found those paternity test results. This time, I knew who she was, though we'd never met. The letter was surprising in its honesty. "Dear Catherine," it began. "You don't know me, but I know who you are. My name is Jennifer Morrison, and I was involved with Michael Harrison for many years, including the time when he was engaged to you. I'm writing because I recently discovered some things about Michael that made me realize how many lies he told both of us. I found out that he was planning to marry you while promising me that you were just a business arrangement. I found out that he had whole timelines planned where he'd maintain both relationships indefinitely. I know this probably doesn't matter to you anymore. It's been years, and from what I can see, you've built an incredible life. But I wanted to apologize for my part in his deception. I was young and foolish, and I believed him when he said your engagement wasn't real. I've spent the last decade raising 2 children essentially alone while Michael drifted in and out of our lives making promises he never kept. I finally had enough and cut him off completely last year. I wanted you to know that walking away from him was the best decision you could have made. I wish I'd had your courage to do the same thing years earlier. I hope you're happy. You deserve it. Jennifer." I read the letter 3 times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. In my previous life, I'd hated Jennifer without ever meeting her, seeing her as the other woman who'd stolen my husband's affection. Now, I saw her as another victim of Michael's selfishness and deception. I wrote back, keeping it brief. "Jennifer, thank you for your letter. I'm sorry for what you went through with Michael. You're right that walking away was the best decision I ever made. I hope you and your children are doing well. The courage to walk away from a bad situation is never wasted, no matter when we find it. Best wishes, Catherine." A month later, Jennifer wrote back, thanking me for my kindness and mentioning that she'd started taking night classes to finish her degree. Her children were thriving, and she was finally building a life on her own terms. I was genuinely happy for her. We'd both escaped Michael's web, just in different ways and at different times. When I turned 40, my consulting firm celebrated its 15th anniversary. We'd grown from a one-woman operation to a company with 50 employees and offices in 3 cities. My twin daughters were in 2nd grade, excelling in school and completely unimpressed by their mother's business success. David had been offered and accepted a position as department chair at the university. We threw a party at our home to celebrate all these milestones, inviting friends, family, colleagues, and clients. My parents were there, healthy and happy, proud of the life I'd built. David's family had flown in from Taiwan, bringing his elderly grandmother who insisted on teaching our daughters how to make dumplings. As I stood on our back patio, watching all these people I loved celebrating together, my mother came up beside me. "You look happy," she said simply. "I am," I replied. "Genuinely, completely happy." "I'm so glad you trusted your instincts all those years ago," my mother said. "When you called off that wedding, I was worried you were making a mistake. But looking at your life now, it was the right choice," I said firmly. "The best choice I ever made." My mother squeezed my hand. "Your father and I are so proud of you, not just for the business success, but for having the courage to choose yourself. So many women don't." I thought about my previous life, about Catherine Harrison who had chosen Michael over herself and paid the ultimate price. I thought about the 15 years I'd spent slowly disappearing into someone else's idea of who I should be. I almost didn't, I admitted to my mother. Choose myself, I mean. I almost went through with it because it seemed easier than dealing with the embarrassment of calling it off. "But you didn't," my mother said. And that made all the difference. Later that night, after the guests had left and the girls were asleep, David and I sat in our living room with glasses of wine, surrounded by the debris of a successful party. "This is a good life," David said, reaching over to take my hand. "It really is," I agreed. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd made different choices?" he asked. "If you'd married Michael instead of calling it off?" I thought about how to answer that question honestly without revealing the impossible truth of my rebirth. "Sometimes," I said carefully. "But I know it wouldn't have been happy. Michael wanted a wife who would support his ambitions while ignoring his deceptions. I would have spent my whole life trying to be enough for someone who was never going to be satisfied with just one person." "I'm glad you didn't marry him," David said. "Entirely selfish reasons, of course." I laughed. "Of course. But also because you deserve better than that, David continued. You deserve a partner who sees your strength and wants to support it, not someone who wants to use it for their own purposes. I found that partner, I said, leaning over to kiss him. Yeah, you did, David agreed with a grin. Lucky you. The next morning, I was in my office working through emails when my assistant buzzed me. Catherine, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Who is it? I asked. There was a pause. Michael Harrison. I felt my stomach clench. I hadn't seen Michael since that encounter at the restaurant 7 years ago. Should I tell him you're busy? My assistant asked. Part of me wanted to say yes, to refuse to see him, to maintain the complete separation I'd worked so hard to build. But another part was curious about what could possibly be so important that he'd show up unannounced after all these years. Give me 5 minutes, then send him in, I said. I used those 5 minutes to center myself, reminding myself that I was not the same woman who'd been engaged to Michael 15 years ago. I was successful, confident, secure in my life and my choices. He couldn't hurt me anymore. When Michael walked into my office, I was shocked by how much he'd aged. He was only 49, but he looked 10 years older, with deep lines around his eyes and a defeated slouch to his shoulders. Catherine, he said. Thank you for seeing me. You have 10 minutes, I said, not offering him a seat. I deserve that, Michael said. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need your help. My help with what? My business is failing, he said bluntly. I've made some bad investments, taken on too much debt, and I'm about to lose everything. I know you have connections in the business community, and I was hoping you might be willing to introduce me to some potential investors or partners. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his audacity. You want me to help save your business? After everything you did? I know it's a lot to ask. Michael, I don't owe you anything, I interrupted. In fact, you owe me an apology for 15 years ago and every year since then. You're right, Michael said quickly. I should have apologized years ago. Catherine, I was a fool. I was selfish and dishonest and I hurt you badly. I'm sorry. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because you want something from me? I asked. Michael had the grace to look ashamed. Both. I am genuinely sorry for how I treated you. But I'm also desperate, and you're the only person I know who might be able to help. What about Jennifer? I asked. Your longtime girlfriend? The mother of your children? Michael's face darkened. She won't speak to me anymore. Cut me off completely a few years ago. Smart woman, I said. Catherine, please. I'm begging you. I'll lose my house, my business, everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had spent his life making selfish choices, and was finally facing consequences he couldn't charm or lie his way out of. In my previous life, I would have helped him. I would have used my connections, compromised my own professional reputation, done whatever it took to save him from his mistakes. Because that's what good wives did. They sacrificed themselves to save their husbands. But I wasn't his wife. I'd never been his wife, not in this timeline. And I had no obligation to save him from himself. No, I said simply. No. Michael looked genuinely shocked. No, I won't help you. Your business failures are the consequence of your own choices and actions. I'm not going to compromise my professional reputation by introducing you to my contacts when I know you have a history of deception and poor judgment. But Catherine, our 10 minutes are up, I said, pressing the button to call my assistant. Please escort Mr. Harrison out. As security led Michael away, he turned back one more time. I really am sorry, he said, for everything. I believe you, I replied. But sorry doesn't obligate me to save you. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about the two paths my life had taken. In one timeline, I'd spent 15 years sacrificing myself for Michael's comfort and ambitions, ending in my death at the bottom of a staircase. In this timeline, I'd chosen myself. I'd built a successful business, married a good man, raised children who were confident and loved. I'd maintained my identity and my dignity. The difference between those two lives was a single choice, made on a single night, to refuse to accept less than I deserved. That evening, I told David about Michael's visit. "How do you feel about seeing him again?" David asked. "Satisfied," I said honestly. He wanted me to save him from his own mistakes and I said no. It felt good to establish that boundary. "Do you think he'll try again?" David asked. "Probably. Men like Michael don't give up easily. But it doesn't matter how many times he asks, the answer will always be no." David pulled me into a hug. "I'm proud of you. It takes strength to hold boundaries with someone who's desperate." "I've had a lot of practice," I said. Over the next few months, Michael did try again. He called my office repeatedly until I had my assistant block his number. He sent emails that went straight to spam. He even tried to approach me at industry events until security escorted him out. But I held firm. Every time he reached out, the answer was the same: no. What I didn't expect was that his desperation would escalate into something more dangerous. It started with anonymous messages on social media, accusing my firm of unethical practices. Then came the negative reviews on business sites, all posted from fake accounts, claiming I'd defrauded clients or engaged in insider trading. None of it was true, but it was damaging nonetheless. My legal team traced the IP addresses back to Michael's apartment. "We can sue him for defamation," my lawyer advised. "We have clear evidence that he's behind these attacks." "Do it," I said without hesitation. I gave him a chance to walk away with dignity. He chose this instead. The lawsuit was swift and decisive. Michael couldn't afford a decent lawyer, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The judge ordered him to cease all contact with me, pay damages for the defamation, and publicly retract all false statements. "Ms. Walsh," the judge said at the final hearing, "I want to commend you for your restraint throughout this process. Many people would have retaliated in kind. You chose the legal path, and that shows character." As Michael was led out of the courtroom, he looked at me one last time, not with hatred or resentment, but with something that looked almost like respect. Later, I received one final letter from him. My lawyer advised me not to read it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Catherine," it began, "I know I have no right to write to you after everything I've done. The judge ordered me not to contact you. And after I send this, I promise I won't again. I'm writing because I finally understand what I lost 15 years ago when you called off our wedding. It wasn't just a wife or a partner or access to your family's money and connections. I lost the chance to be with someone who genuinely cared about me and believed in me. I spent my entire adult life trying to have everything: the respectable wife, the exciting mistress, the successful business, the secret family. I thought I could maintain all those different lives without consequence. But the truth is, I ended up with nothing. Jennifer and the kids won't speak to me. My business failed. My reputation is destroyed. And the one person who might have genuinely loved me if I'd been honest with her, you, saw through me before I could trap her in my web of lies. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that walking away from me was the smartest thing you ever did. And I'm genuinely happy that you found someone who deserves you. I hope your husband knows how lucky he is. Michael." I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of the life I'd escaped. That night, I told David about the letter. "Do you think he's being sincere?" David asked. "Probably," I said. Rock bottom has a way of forcing people to be honest with themselves. But sincerity doesn't obligate me to forgive him or help him." "True," David agreed. "Though I have to say, there's something satisfying about him finally admitting that you were right to leave." "It is satisfying," I admitted. "But more than that, it's validating. For years after I called off that wedding, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. If I'd thrown away something good because of cold feet or irrational fear. And now you know for certain that your instincts were right," David said. "Exactly. Though honestly, I knew that the moment I found out about Jennifer and the kids I stopped myself, almost revealing too much about my previous life." "In your what?" David asked. "In my research about him." I finished smoothly. "When I looked into his background after calling off the wedding." David nodded, accepting the explanation. He didn't know about my rebirth, about the previous timeline where I'd married Michael and paid the ultimate price. And he didn't need to know. That knowledge was mine alone. A secret that had shaped my choices, but didn't need to be shared. 5 years later, when I turned 45, I received news that Michael had died of a heart attack. He was only 54. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just a vague sense that a chapter had finally closed. His obituary was brief, mentioning his career in real estate, and listing Jennifer Morrison as his longtime companion, and their 2 children. There was no mention of me, which was exactly how I wanted it. Jennifer sent me a note after the funeral. "Catherine, I thought you should know that Michael spoke about you often in his final years. He said you were the one who got away. The woman who was smart enough to see through him before he could destroy her life the way he destroyed mine. I know that's probably not comforting, but I thought you deserved to know that he spent the last decade of his life regretting how he treated you. Thank you for responding to my letter all those years ago with kindness instead of judgment. It meant more than you know. My children are doing well. They're in college now, both studying business. They've learned from their father's mistakes in ways he never could. I hope you're still happy. You deserve it. Jennifer." I wrote back one final time. "Jennifer, thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm glad your children are thriving. You did an incredible job raising them alone. I am happy. Deeply, genuinely happy in ways I never imagined possible. I hope you find that same happiness for yourself. Best wishes always, Catherine." That evening, I told David and our daughters about Michael's death over dinner. "Who was Michael?" Aurora asked. She was 18 now, preparing for her first year of college. "Someone I almost married a long time ago," I said. "Before I met your father." "Why didn't you marry him?" Diana asked. "Because I realized the night before the wedding that we weren't right for each other." "That must have been scary," Aurora said. "Calling off a wedding at the last minute." "Terrifying," I admitted. "But it was the right choice." "How did you know?" Diana asked. I thought about how to explain to my daughters the importance of trusting your instincts, of valuing yourself enough to walk away from situations that don't serve you. I knew because I couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life with someone who made me feel like I had to be smaller or less ambitious to make him comfortable. I said. I knew because when I thought about our future together, I felt trapped instead of excited. "But what if you'd been wrong?" Aurora asked. "What if you just had cold feet and threw away something good?" "That was a risk I had to take," I said. "But looking back, I know I wasn't wrong. Every piece of information that came out about him after we broke up confirmed that walking away was the right choice." David reached over and took my hand. "Your mother's courage to choose herself over social expectations is one of the things I admire most about her." "It wasn't courage," I said. "It was survival. I knew that marrying him would slowly kill who I was, even if I didn't know all the specific ways it would happen." The girls were quiet for a moment, processing this. "Mom," Diana said finally, "thank you for being the kind of woman who chooses herself. It makes it easier for us to do the same." I felt tears prick my eyes. This was why I'd fought so hard to build a different life, not just for me, but for the daughters who would learn from my choices. "Always choose yourself," I told them. Not selfishly but wisely. Choose yourself when the alternative is disappearing into someone else's expectations. Choose yourself when staying means losing who you are. Choose yourself when leaving feels impossible but necessary. "Even if it means being alone?" Aurora asked. "Especially if it means being alone," I said. "Being alone is temporary. Losing yourself is much harder to recover from." 10 years later, I stood at my 60th birthday party, surrounded by the life I'd built. My consulting firm had just celebrated its 35th anniversary. My daughters were both successful in their own careers, Aurora as a civil rights lawyer, Diana as an architect. David had recently published his 5th book, and showed no signs of slowing down. My mother was still alive, healthy and sharp at 86. My father had passed peacefully 2 years earlier, but not before telling me how proud he was of everything I'd accomplished. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he'd said during one of our last conversations. "That you had the courage to call off that wedding all those years ago. I never told you this, but I had a bad feeling about Michael from the start. I was relieved when you ended it, even if it did cost me a fortune in deposits. Why didn't you say anything? I'd asked. Because it was your decision to make, he'd said. I could have shared my concerns, but ultimately, you had to figure it out for yourself. And you did. Now, surrounded by friends and family, I thought about the 2 lives I'd lived. In one timeline, I'd been dead at 53, murdered by a man who'd resented my existence. In this timeline, I was 60 and thriving, celebrated and loved by people who knew and valued the real me. Speech. Speech, someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. I stood, glass in hand, looking at all these faces, David, my daughters, my friends, my colleagues, my mother. I'm not much for speeches, I began, but I'll share one piece of advice that shaped my life. Trust your instincts, even when the whole world is telling you you're wrong. Especially when the whole world is telling you you're wrong. 40 years ago, I made a choice that seemed crazy to everyone around me. I called off my wedding the night before it was supposed to happen, disappointing hundreds of people and losing deposits on everything from flowers to venues to a honeymoon in Hawaii. People thought I was having a breakdown. Some thought I was being selfish or flighty or commitment phobic. But I knew deep in my gut that marrying that man would be the worst mistake of my life. And I was right. That one choice, that one moment of trusting myself over everyone else's expectations, changed everything. It led to my business, to meeting David, to having my incredible daughters, to building this life that I love. So my advice to all of you, especially the young people here, is this. Learn to distinguish between fear and intuition. Fear tells you to avoid risk. Intuition tells you to avoid danger. Sometimes they feel similar, but they're fundamentally different. If your gut is telling you that something is wrong, a relationship, a job, a path you're on, listen to it. Even if you can't articulate exactly what's wrong. Even if everyone else thinks you're crazy. Even if walking away means facing embarrassment or loss. Trust yourself. Choose yourself. Save yourself. Because no one else is going to do it for you. The room erupted in applause, and I sat down, feeling David's arm around my shoulders and my daughter's hands reaching for mine. This was the life I'd chosen. Not perfect, but authentic. Not easy, but honest. Not what everyone expected, but exactly what I needed. And it had all started with one choice, made on one night, to refuse to settle for a life that would slowly kill me. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests started leaving, my daughter Aurora pulled me aside. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." "What is it, sweetie?" "You know James, the guy I've been dating for the past year?" "Of course. Nice guy, good job, seems to really care about you." "He proposed," Aurora said. "That's wonderful. Wait, why don't you look happy about it?" Aurora bit her lip. "Because I don't want to marry him. I like him, but I don't love him enough to spend the rest of my life with him. And everyone keeps telling me I'm being too picky, that good guys like James don't come around often, that I should be grateful someone successful wants to marry me." I felt my heart clench. This was the moment I'd prepared her for her entire life. "What does your gut tell you?" I asked. That saying yes would be settling. That I'd spend my whole life wondering what I gave up to be with someone who's fine but not right for me. "Then you know what to do." "But Mom, everyone's going to think I'm crazy. His family loves me. My friends keep telling me to say yes. Even Diana thinks I'm overthinking it." I took both her hands in mine. "Aurora, I was 23 when I called off my wedding. You're 28. You're old enough to know your own mind. If you're not sure, the answer is no." "But what if I regret it?" she asked, echoing the same fears I'd had 40 years ago. "You might," I said honestly. "But I can promise you that regret over walking away from the wrong person is much easier to live with than regret over staying with them." Aurora hugged me tightly. "Thank you for always supporting me, even when I'm making unpopular choices." "That's what mothers do," I said. "At least, that's what mothers should do." 2 weeks later, Aurora broke off her engagement. James was hurt but understanding. Their friends were shocked. My mother, surprisingly, was supportive. She learned from the best. My mother told me when I mentioned Aurora's decision, "You taught her that it's okay to choose herself." "I just don't want her to make the mistakes I almost made," I said. You didn't make any mistakes, my mother said firmly. You figured out the truth before it was too late. That's wisdom, not luck. A year later, Aurora met someone new, a human rights activist who shared her passion for social justice and supported her career ambitions without reservation. They dated for 3 years before getting engaged. And this time, Aurora's face glowed with certainty instead of doubt. This is what right feels like, she told me as we went dress shopping. When I think about marrying Chris, I feel excited and peaceful at the same time. Not trapped or uncertain. That's how I felt marrying your father, I said. As I watched my daughter try on wedding dresses, I thought about the ripple effects of that choice I'd made 40 years ago. By choosing myself, I'd modeled for my daughters what self-respect looked like. They'd grown up seeing a mother who valued her own dreams and ambitions, who set boundaries, who refused to diminish herself for anyone's comfort. And now they were carrying that lesson into their own lives. On my 65th birthday, David surprised me with a trip to Italy, the honeymoon I'd never taken with Michael, now experienced with the man I actually loved. As we sat in a cafe in Florence, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, David asked me a question I'd been waiting 42 years to hear. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd married Michael? I considered lying, keeping my impossible secret safe. But David deserved honesty, as much of it as I could give. All the time, I said. Sometimes I have these vivid nightmares where I did marry him, where I spent years sacrificing everything for him only to discover he'd been living a double life, where I confronted him and I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence without revealing too much. And what? David prompted gently. And it ended badly, I said. Very badly. In my nightmares, I don't survive that confrontation. David was quiet for a long moment. Do you think those nightmares are just anxiety, or do you think some part of you knew Michael was dangerous? I think intuition works in mysterious ways, I said carefully. I think some part of me knew that marrying him would be the death of who I was, if not literally then metaphorically. Well, I'm grateful you trusted that intuition, David said. Even if it means you have nightmares about roads not taken. The nightmares are a small price to pay for the life I have now, I said honestly. That night, lying in our hotel bed with David asleep beside me, I allowed myself to fully remember my previous life for the first time in years. The suffocating marriage, the constant feeling of being less than enough, the devastating discovery of Michael's betrayal, the final violent confrontation at the top of those marble stairs. I remembered the feeling of falling, the crack of my head against the hard floor, the cold spreading through my body as I watched Michael pour himself a drink instead of calling for help. I remembered dying, and I remembered the impossible gift of waking up young again with all that knowledge intact. In my previous life, I'd been Catherine Harrison for 15 years before becoming nothing at all. In this life, I'd been Catherine Walsh for 65 years and counting, building something real and lasting and meaningful. The difference wasn't just in the name I carried, but in the choices I'd made when given the chance to do it over. I had chosen myself. I had chosen life. I had chosen authenticity over appearances, growth over stagnation, honest love over convenient arrangements. And that had made all the difference. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent promise to my younger self, the one who'd had the courage to call off that wedding despite the embarrassment and pressure. Thank you for being brave enough to save us both. The story of my rebirth, my second chance, my redemption wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was simply about choosing to live instead of merely existing. And every day since that choice, I had lived fully, authentically, joyfully. That was the greatest victory of all.